How you guys doing? So the question tonight is inflation going down? So welcome guys to This Week in Money. I'm your host, Jose Gonzalez, aka Mr. Wealth Mindset. And tonight I'm going to be talking about whether inflation is actually going down. All right. A lot of people, we've been had a tough couple of years. We've been experiencing massive inflation in the last couple of years. Some of it precipitated by the pandemic. Some of it precipitated, supposedly by different things happening around the world. Some economists have said that the war in the Ukraine has something to do with it, or the pipeline, the Exxon pipeline, the Keystone pipeline being shut down by the Biden administration has something to do with it. And while those factors certainly played a role in impacting our economy, they actually have very little to do with our inflation that we're dealing with now. And so the Fed is reporting that inflation is down this year. Okay. And I want to get into that because it's partly true. Okay. It's technically true, but there's also a part where it's not true. All right. It's not true that inflation has actually gone down. So I want to explore that with you. I would love to know your comments and thoughts on whether you think that inflation is going down. And listen, if you guys are watching this live, I want you to do me a favor and share this. Or if you're watching this on replay, right? Thank you for tuning in. Do me a favor and share this, because the information that I'm sharing, the reason that I do the, this week in This Week in Money is because there's a lot of things going on right now in the world, in our economy, that the average person is not even aware of. Okay, the average person is not even aware of. And so my goal is to educate people and to bring awareness to exactly what it is that's happening today. So we're going to get into this topic about what's going on with inflation. Is it up? Is it down? We're going to dive deep into that. So again, if you know someone who can be impacted by this information, do me a favor and share. And if you're watching this live, comment in the chats. Let me know where you're watching from. And so we're going to get into it now. The question about inflation. Okay. So currently, inflation is at about, depending on who you ask, is at about 6 or 5%, right? The latest numbers is that we're at 5%. We'll actually know what it was for April. The Bureau of Labor Statistics will release that on May 10th. Okay, so those numbers will be out. As of March, it was supposedly 5%. In February, 6%, and in January, 6.4%. Okay. Now, there's something that happened this year, January 2023, that I'm not sure that most people are aware of. Okay. So I'm going to share this with you. And I would love to know if this is something that you're aware of, because you see, when we talk about inflation being up or down, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, used to measure over a 2-year span. What does that mean? So let's just use round numbers here. Meaning, if in 2020, January 2020, I'm just using pretend numbers. These are not real numbers. But in January 2020, inflation was at 10%. And then you jump to January 2022 and inflation is at 7%. They would say that inflation is down 3%. Okay, in terms of variance. But this year, January 2023, the Bureau of Labor Statistics made an announcement. It's on their website. You can go look it up. It's on their website. And I don't feel as though there was perhaps any media coverage for this. I'm not sure how many people are aware of this. But on the website for Bureau of Labor Statistics, they made an announcement back in January, which said, starting January 2023, data for the Bureau of Labor Statistics plans to update weights annually for consumer price index based on single calendar year of data. This reflects a change from the prior practice, which I just talked about, of updating weights biannually using 2 years of expenditure data. So why is this important? Okay, you might say, all right, well, they used to use 2 years, now they're using 1 year. Why is this important? Well, I'll tell you why it's important. You see, right now our inflation is at about 5%. Let's just say is that 5%, because that's what they reported that it was during March. Now, if we use the old system, and this just changed in January, if we use the old system, all right, for the update weights, well, 2 years ago in January, inflation was 2.6%. So if we use the old system, with it being 5% right now, you would say that inflation is up 2.4%, okay, from March 2021. But very quietly, apparently, they've changed the way that they measure the update weights, and now it's year over year. So last year, March, inflation was 8.5%. So because they've changed the way that they update the weights of inflation, instead of saying, as they would have said 2 years ago or last year, they would have reported this as inflation is up 2.4%. Now, because they've changed this, they can say inflation is down 3.5%. All right. So, the Fed, the current administration is going to say to you, hey, because of our policies, because of what we're doing, inflation is down. And technically that is true. But except for the fact that starting January 2023, this is the first time in history that they've measured the annual weights for consumer price index in this way. So if they was doing it the way they did it last year and the way that they've always done it, inflation would be up. But since they just changed the way it's measured, they can say that inflation is down. So is it up? Is it down? I guess that's for us to decide. I guess it's for us to determine, right? Because this new way of measuring inflation is literally just a couple of months old, right? It went into effect in February. All right. And I suspect that it's because the Fed wants to change the narrative about this massive inflation that we have. And I'm going to get into some of the reasons why I suspect that that's the case, because you see, the thing is, they're talking about inflation being down, but the price of everything has gone up. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but food costs more, right? Chicken is up over 10%. Butter is up over 26%. Milk is up 50%. All right. Eggs are up 170%. Coffee, 13%. Baby food, 10%. Rice, pasta, bread is up 15%. So if all of these things are going up in price, I don't understand how our inflation is, quote unquote, going down. Unless, of course, as in this case, they've manipulated the numbers. Last week, if you missed last week's episode of This Week in Money, we talked about the massive unemployment that we've already seen just in the first quarter of 2023. All right. There's been like 270,000 more jobs, layoffs in this first quarter versus first quarter of last year. All right. That's an almost 400% increase in layoffs. Okay. So, like I said, food prices are up. All right. The price of shelter is up right now. The most that has been in the last 30 years is up like 7.9%. Transportation is up over 14%. And, I know a lot of people that have jobs and work. I don't know many of them that are getting a 7 or 14 or even, or 10% increase on their job. So this pretty much means that if you're working at the same job that you were working last year, you are struggling. This is why this is important. You see, wealthy people are not affected by this. Okay. But the average American, all right, who's making an average salary is greatly affected by this. The average salary in America right now is around $53,000 a year. So if you're making $53,000 a year, and that's just an average, right? The poverty line is somewhere around 14,000. But again, this is an average, okay? Because if you're living in San Francisco right now, you could be making 100,000 and still be below the poverty line based on the cost of living in San Francisco. The same might be true in New York, which is where I'm from. I no longer live in New York, but it's gotten exorbitant. Cost of everything is just going through the roof. So again, I want to share some numbers with you guys, and mind you, let's just say that we're at 5% inflation now, and you might say, well, listen, we're at 5% inflation now. What's the big deal? Well, it's a huge deal. All right, during the 2008 crisis. We had a high of 5.6. Even last year, we had a high of 9.1. So I talked about last week, Phillips curve, which is when inflation goes down, unemployment goes up, right? And so the Fed is trying to get inflation under control. They're trying to cool the market, but from where I see it, I don't really see that happening. Now, let me talk about real quickly. There's actually 4 kinds of economic cycles, all right? And again, like I said, the purpose of this show is to create education around finances, because most of this we were not taught in school. I don't know about you. If you taught this in school, I'd love to know what school you went to, but most of this we were not taught in school. So there's actually 4 cycles of 4 economic cycles. So the first one is expansion. Okay, we touched on this last week because we just ended a period of a record 128 month period of economic growth, of expansion. Okay, economic expansion, and that went from June 2019 to about February 2020. All right. And, during expansion, inflation is going to be low, probably around that 2% or lower. The GDP is going to be somewhere between 2 to 3%. Unemployment is going to be somewhere between 4.5%. And it's going to be a bull market, right? Now, so that's expansion. The next kind of cycle, and I like to reference this to like spring, right? Where things are blooming, there's opportunity, there's new life. Then you have the peak cycle, right? And I liken this to summer, right? Things are hot, all right? It's great weather. Everyone's doing great. GDP grows over 3%, all right? Things are overpriced, right? People have money, and you can get lucky. You can get lucky and make some big money. Okay, you can go into certain industries and you're like, man, this person was struggling. Now they're making a bunch of money, or a bunch of people start going into a certain industry or career path and just start making money. Okay, that would be a peak. Then you have your contraction, which is like the summer, right? You're coming off that summer. It's just like the fall. All right, you're coming off the summer. Leaves are falling. GDP goes down, probably under 2%. Unemployment rates go up, right? Probably above 6%. The market drops, and there's a potential recession. Okay, and then the last kind of economic cycle is a trough. All right, and a trough is when it's winter. Okay, the economy is down. It's low. It's lower than it's been since the expansion started. Now, the thing about a trough is that even though, the good and the bad is that things are bad all the way around, but you can't go lower than that. All right. Things actually have to start picking up. So you'll start to see the demand, of products and services of production start to grow. You'll start to see, unemployment starts to go down. The market starts to get going again. Like it's the bottom, right? You're at the bottom. You can't get lower than that. And so things will start to pick up from there. And it usually marks the end of a recession. Okay. Now, I've been talking about this for weeks. And, I feel that we are either in a recession or headed for a tremendous recession. And the reason that I say that is because, well, let me just say this real quick. So I just talked about the 4 economic cycles, right? However, it's, in my opinion, kind of unclear what economic cycle we're in right now. According to Fidelity Investments, they say that we are in a late cycle expansion phase, which will likely end up in a recession in 2023, right? And that's basically, in layman's terms, it's an era where there's economic expansion matures, right? It's kind of, is kind of gotten as far as it's going to go. There's pressure to raise inflation. The yield curve flattens out or inverts, and it basically leads to contraction. Okay, so you have that peak. We're in that late cycle peak, and now going into contraction and leading into a recession. All right. Now, the reason that I say these things is because the economy is cyclical, history is cyclical, right? We all know that things that, trends that happened before, it's important to understand trends, it's important to understand history, because history tends to repeat itself. And so the reason that I say that is because we're going through a period that's very similar to the Great Recession that we experienced recently. So that Great Recession period was technically between December 2007 and June 2009. Okay. But, you saw this in a few different markets, right? You saw this in the housing market where prices peaked. Okay. They peaked mid 2006, prices were at a peak. But by mid 2009, okay, in that Great Recession, the prices were at a trough. So they went through that peak, they went through that contraction. In fact, during that time of the Great Recession that we just had about 15 years ago, housing market prices dropped 30%. I'm sure some of you listening to this might know what I'm talking about. And I have lots of friends that were deeply affected by this. Okay, I have a buddy. His name is Ralph. We grew up together in Washington Heights. He used to be a cop for a long time. And I remember that I was living in Orlando during this time, and I bumped into him. It was like, a chance meeting. Like we were literally living in like one neighborhood over, right? And so I bumped into him, and he told me how he bought his house for about 200 something thousand. He had been saving up money. He was a cop in New York. He had been saving up money. And so, to pay off the house quicker, he put $70,000 on his house when he bought it. All right. And he had purchased it 2 years ago. So in the meanwhile, he had been paying the mortgage. He had paid another $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on the house. Right. And when the market crashed, they appraised his house. The bank appraised his house for $140,000. But he still owed over $200,000, right? He still owed the full mortgage. Okay. And so if you study these cycles that we're going through right now, if you pay attention to what's happening with this inflationary period that we're going through, you'll see that we're kind of trending towards the exact same thing happened during the Great Recession. During that time, the S&P 500 index fell 57%, right? So it peaked in October 2007, and by March 2009, about 18 months, it was at a trough, right? Bottomed out. Okay. So in fact, I was having two interesting conversations, one with my wife and one with my sister recently, right? My wife and I were in the process of planning, relocating to another state, and we're having the conversation about buying versus renting, you know, and as homeowners, she's owned her house, for almost 20 years. Our place in New York, we've owned same 20 plus years. When you're a property owner, sometimes you struggle with the idea of renting, right? You're like, I'm not giving somebody my money, right? That's just throwing money out the door. And so we were having, a conversation about this because, you know, based on what I'm seeing, based on these trends, based on what I'm seeing in the market, I don't know if it's a good time to buy. Right? I was having the conversation with my sister, and she was telling me, you don't want to rent. You don't want to rent. You're giving your money away. You definitely want to buy. And I said, okay, well, let's just use these numbers of 2008, 2009, when dropped housing prices dropped by 30%. Let's just use those numbers as an example, because I think it's going to be a lot worse in 2008, 2009. And I'm not alone in this. Okay. But let's just use those numbers. And let's say, this is what I was telling my sister. I was saying to her, let's say that I rent a place, and over a 2-year period, I spend 50 grand renting the place, right? And my intention is to buy a house that's worth currently $300,000. Okay. So let's just use these numbers from 2008, 2009. Now let's say that after I've been renting for 2 years and spent 50 grand renting, that $300,000 house drops 30%. Now that property is worth 200,000. Okay. So if I buy it now at 300,000, well, yeah, I saved the $50,000 in rent, right? Except that when the market drops, it's going to be a $200,000 house, and I'm still on the hook for 300,000. And she said to me, well, the market is going to correct and it's going to come up in value. I said, yes, you're absolutely right. When the market crashes, eventually it will correct and that house will come back up in value. However, if it's going to correct and come back up in value, isn't it better to buy that 200,000? Right? Isn't it better to buy that 200,000 than buy it now? So that's a matter of personal choice. There's really no right or wrong. It's about your risk tolerance, what you can live with. Okay. And again, I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping I'm completely wrong. There is no market crash, right? That I'm just talking jibber jabber and none of this happens. But based on what I'm seeing, based on what the Fed is doing, I think it's inevitable. I think that it's inevitable because what happened in 2000 and 2008, 2009, not only was it, one of the worst times ever, but we're on the same trajectory right now. We're on the absolute same trajectory. And the inflation was around 6% back then. And in 1 year, the Fed dropped it radically. Okay, they dropped it radically. They got it under 1%. But if you understand, how that's done, then you understand that it's going to be a bitter pill to swallow because hundreds of people are going to be continued to laid off. That's what I talked about last week, how I think that more layoffs are coming. All right. So people are going to continue to suffer financially. Also, truth be told, I don't think that they're going to be able to fully tackle this inflation. I don't fully think that they're going to be able to tackle this inflation, and I'm going to tell you here why in a second. All right. Now, there's three kinds of inflations, or should I say three kinds of things that trigger inflation. First, you have what's called cost pull inflation. Okay. And simply put, that's, when prices go up. So, prices go up and businesses have to adjust for that. So they might have to increase their prices, right? Or they may have to close or downsize their business. Okay, they may have to downsize employees. And like I mentioned, we've already seen a huge amount of that going on. All right. So that cost gets passed on to the consumer. All right. So if you've been going to restaurants lately, if you've tried to build a house lately, it costs a lot more than it used to because the price of lumber is up, the price of food is up, okay, the price of edible oils is up. I remember last year I was working on a food truck project in Houston, Texas. All right, for an old friend of mine. And we were going to Restaurant Depot, right? Because we were doing some testing, some recipe testing, and we were out shopping. We were just buying enough food to test a few recipes. And so we were at Walmart, and they had a gallon of oil, and the gallon of oil was like $15 or something like that. And he was like, "Hey, should we get the oil here at Walmart?" And I'm like, "Heck no, we're gonna go to Restaurant Depot. We're gonna get a 3-gallon, 5-gallon oil for like $20." All right. I was a chef in New York for many, many years, and the most I ever paid for one of those containers of oil, which I'm not mistaken is 3 gallons. But the point is, the most I ever paid was $26. So we go to Restaurant Depot, the same oil, $44. Okay, now it has since dropped, but if you were in the food service business, if you were selling food, if you had a restaurant or a food truck, you know, hey, Coach Mary, how you doing? Great to see you. Thank you for chiming in. If you owned a restaurant, if you were selling food, you have to pass on that cost to your customer, right? Because now it's costing you a lot more money to produce those French fries, those fried Brussels sprouts, that fried chicken. It costs you more money. All right. So that's the first kind of inflation, cost pull inflation. The next kind of inflation is demand pull inflation. All right. And this happens, when the government cuts taxes. Okay. And as a result, people have more money to spend, right? Taxes are lower, so people have more money to spend. And so that also activates inflation. But the number one way that inflation is activated is through the printing of money. Okay. This can be in the form of stimulus checks like we saw during the pandemic, right? Where in 1 month of 2020, the government printed up more money in 1 month than we have in the last 100 years. All right. In fact, over the last 3 years, we've printed up more money just in the last 3 years than we have in the entire history of this country. Also, you're seeing this with all these banks bailouts, right? We talked about this before with the Silicon Valley Bank. Well, in case you haven't noticed, First Republic Bank just failed. All right. It was announced this past Friday. So this is airing Monday, May 1st, 2023, in case you're seeing this on a replay. And this past Friday, at the end of the market closing, the Fed announced that First Republic Bank failed. And they've been working desperately. I think that JP Morgan came in and bought it, but they've been working desperately up until Sunday night to try to find a buyer, right? To try to find a buyer for this bank. But ultimately, they're not going to let this bank fail the same way that they didn't let Silicon Valley and other banks fail. So to put it short, when a bank fails, in case people don't know what that means, it means that usually, for whatever reason, people panic and they start to take their money out. But guess what? People put the money into the bank, All right. And the bank does not have your money because your bank makes money by lending your money out. We have a banking system called the fractional reserve bank. And so when you put $100 in the bank lends out $90. All right. And it used to be that the bank was supposed to keep on hand 10% of your money. Well, when Biden came into office last year, well, he didn't come into office last year, but last year he signed Executive Order 14067, which now allows banks to not have to keep any of your money on hand. So, the Silicon Valley Bank was precipitated. That bank fail was precipitated by a few things, namely one of their biggest account holders was Peter Thiel, the guy who started PayPal, and he took out his money, which was like 30-40 billion dollars. But guess what? The bank doesn't have it. Okay, so they have to start cashing in a bunch of financial instruments, and this caused other people to panic. All right, and want to pull their money out, and the bank doesn't have it. So when the government comes in and bails out a bank, they're literally printing money out of thin air. They're saying, what, you need how much? 30,000, 30 million? And at first, they were telling people, the FDIC is supposed to insure people up to $250,000. At first, they were telling people with less than $250,000 that they may not get all their money. Eventually, they had to revert. Okay. But if you had $1 million in the bank, you were almost left with $250,000. So, printing money, right? Either because the government's giving away money, they're stimulating the economy, or banks, they're saving banks from failing. So these are the three things that cause inflation. But the biggest one is the printing of money. And like I said, in the last 3 years, we've printed more money. No, that's absolutely right. It is incredible that you can't get your own money in the from your bank. Now, the way that the Fed even calculates inflation, again, there's a lot of, boring economic terms here that people don't pay attention to, but basically they take the cost of the market basket from 1 year and they divide that. That's how you get the CPI, Consumer Price Index, and they divide that by the cost of the market base, okay, for the base year. So they take the cost of last year, they divide that by the cost of this year when it's over. And this includes the cost of food, beverage, housing, clothes, transportation, medical care, all types of things, right? Recreation, education, other things. But the bottom line is, who controls inflation? All right, we're talking about inflation and rates being this and rates being that, but who controls inflation? Well, inflation is controlled by two entities. Number one, the Federal Reserve, okay? And basically, when the way that they operate is that when times are bad, they lower rates. When times are good, they increase rates, right? And then the government, right? The Fed and the government. And how's the government control inflation? Well, they raise and lower taxes, and then they regulate and deregulate certain things. Okay, so these are kind of like the knobs that they pull. All right, and so you might be wondering, well, what how does the Fed know when things are bad, when they should this and that? This is a little known fact that I'm going to share with you guys. But there are over 6,000 small banks in the entire United States. Okay, there's over 6,000 small banks. And guess what? 80% of them are in a holding company, which is owned by the Fed. All right. So the Fed has a very good pulse on what's happening with your money. They have a very good pulse on what's happening with your money. All right. Now, another thing that I think that is a big indicator as to, what's going to happen with inflation. Is it going to continue to go down? Is it going to go back up? Are we heading for a recession? Like I mentioned before, if you watch my content, if you watch This Week in Monday nights here live on YouTube, Facebook, and Facebook, on Facebook, then I've been saying this for a while. I believe we're headed not just for a recession, but I believe we're headed for a depression. Okay. And I'll tell you why. So first of all, let's talk about bankruptcies, because I think that this is a very telling, number that people need to be aware of. So far, this is May 1st that I'm airing this episode. So far in the first 4 months of 2023, there have been 70 bankruptcies. Okay? 70 bankruptcies. Now, you might be saying, well, what's the big deal with that, right? Well, why does that matter? Well, the reason that it matters is because the last couple of times that we've had this many bankruptcies was in 2020. All right. And we all know what happened in 2020 with the pandemic. And then in 2009, during the Great Recession. So in 2020, during the same first 4 months, we had 71, right? This is the third worst year of bankruptcies so far. In 2020, we had 71 bankruptcies in the first 4 months. And we finished the year with 244 bankruptcies. Whereas the year before, we had 144 bankruptcies. So in 1 year, bankruptcies jumped by 100. Okay. Now in 2009, during the financial crisis, during the Great Recession, we had a total of 293 bankruptcies. In 2008, again, in the middle of the Great Recession, we had 225 bankruptcies. So we are already on pace this year to have over 200 bankruptcies. Okay. And the last 2 times that this happened at such great rates was back in 2000 and 2009, 2008 during the Great Recession. In fact, in the last 20 years, the highest number of bankruptcies that we had was 158 in 2010. Okay, so we're on pace. We have almost half as many in the first 4 months of 2010. All right. Another indicator for me about why we're headed for a recession, we're headed for a depression, and I don't believe that the Fed will be able to get inflation under control, is that for the first time in a long time, for the 5th time in our history, the M2 charts, which shows the money in circulation in our country, for the 5th time in our history, that number is down. Okay. Now, the last time that number was down, the M2 was down, was in 1929. All right. At the beginning of the Great Depression. The time before that was in 1921. And so we had a recession, but we didn't have a depression. And the reason for that was that the Fed did the right thing. Okay. And I don't see this happening in today's day and age, but they drastically reduced government spending. Okay. And they cut rates. And so that's how they were able to prevent a depression, but there was still a massive recession. Okay, so again, the last time that the M2 numbers have been down, this was down, was reported 4.1%. And again, I invite you guys to research this, familiarize yourself with what M1, M2 is. All right, it gives you an indication of the amount of money in circulation. The M1 shows you how much money is in circulation around the world. M2 shows you how much money is in circulation here. And like I said, the M2 numbers came out that they're down, and that this is the first time since 1929 when we had the Great Depression. Okay, so again, I know I shared a lot of information with you guys. There's a lot going on. And, the reason I do these lives on a weekly basis is because if you're not paying attention to what's going on, it's gonna come out of complete left field. All right. I'm hoping that the viewers of this live, you continue to share this with your friends and family, because you might be saying, all right, well, you shared all this information. Well, what can I do? I'll give you a few ideas for what I think that people can do. All right. I'll give you a few ideas for what I think that people can do. But I'm not here to say that, hey, I have the answers. All right. I know what I'm doing, what we're doing on our family side to prepare for what's coming. So one thing that I think that we can do, and that's kind of the point of this show, is to create awareness. We need to be talking about this. We need to be talking to our friends and families and co-workers, and finding out what's going on. Why did the Bureau of Labor Statistics change the way that they measure inflation, update weights? Okay, why are prices higher? What's going on? So that's one thing. I think that we need to start talking about this, right? Because we're supposed to be a government of we the people, right? So we the people need to be abreast of what's going on in our country and how it's affecting us, because a lot of people, especially lower income to middle income people, are already being gravely affected, but are going to continue to be gravely affected by what's happening. The next thing that I would suggest that we can do right now is not to engage in any type of frivolous spending. Now, we should never spend frivolously, okay, but I think that now is especially a time when you want to audit your spending, audit your finances before the IRS does it for you. And the third thing, and again, these are just suggestions, right? Nothing is foolproof. But the third thing, and I think that this is paramount, is I think that people need to really start to increase their market value. Okay, last week I talked about unemployment, and I talked about the fact that, a lot of people's jobs are safe because those people bring a lot of value to their jobs. But even some of the people who are highly valuable to their jobs or their companies are still going to see themselves being let go. The company's going to move on from you, because even though you might bring a lot of value, you might be compensated commensurate with that type of value. Okay. And sometimes when companies make cuts, they go for the highest salary people because it's just the easiest way to bring down the cost of labor. But I think that, this is a time especially where people need to be focus on increasing their market value. All right. That can be, learning about the economy, learning about investing, beginning to invest. All right. Or it can be, learning new skills, right? Learning about AI. Tom Bilyeu did a post recently where he said, AI is not going to take your job. A person using AI is going to take your job. Okay. So if you're not up on AI, let me tell you, you can bemoan it. You can be upset. You can call it names. It's here. It's going to continue to be here. It's going to continue to grow. And you can either ride the wave or get crushed. Okay, those are your two choices. You're not going to be able to dissuade or undo what is happening and what is about to happen technologically in our world, with AI at the epicenter of that. But it's not the only form of technology that we have to be abreast of, that we have to, start to improve ourselves on. So that's what I will say to people. Improve your skills so that, hey, if you're working for a company and you find yourself, where you're being laid off, where you have enough skills where you can utilize those skills and leverage them in the marketplace to still be able to provide for yourself and your family, or where you make yourself, so valuable that your company cannot afford, with whatever downsizing or market correction happens, to let you go. All right. So again, guys, thank you for joining me this week on This Week in Money. We'll be back next week with another topic. Please, if you're seeing this live, if you're seeing this on replay, comment below. Let me know your thoughts on inflation. If you think it's going up, if you think it's going down, if you think we're headed for a recession, if you think we're headed for a depression, let me know. Okay. Because, the Fed keeps, they keep kicking the can down the road. A recession used to technically be when the GDP was down for 2 consecutive quarters. Now, we saw that happen last year, 2022. First 2 quarters, GDP was down 2 consecutive quarters. For some reason, they didn't call that a recession. Okay. They keep kicking the can down the road, but I'm afraid that we're about to run out of road. Okay. Now, first quarter this year was just announced. Again, the GDP was down. Okay. And it hasn't been down this much the way it was now as it has since the Great Recession. So I'm not gonna say that it's gonna be up or down this quarter that we're in right now, Q2. That remains to be seen. But as I mentioned, they've already kicked the goalpost down the road last year with the recession. I have my own suspicions as to why they don't want to announce a recession. But again, I've been very clear and stated that I believe that it's inevitable that we're headed for a recession and or inevitably a Great Depression. So thank you, my love, for bringing such valuable information to all. Thank you, baby. I love you. My wife's my number one cheerleader. I'm the luckiest man in the world. Well, with that, guys, I will see you back here next week, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Monday night. Till then, be blessed, be amazing. Peace.